Welcome to Indie Film Podcast. I'm Victoria.
And I am Chuck. Our goal with this podcast is to share our indie filmmaking mistakes so that you can avoid them.
So follow us on our journey towards cinematic success or continued filmmaking foibles.
And the foibles we're talking about in the month of March are fixing it in post, which have a long list of things that you have to fix in post and a long list of things that you shouldn't fix in post.
But you might have to.
Yeah, you always got to fix something. And Soundscape slip-ups is this episode.
It is.
Audio can be rough on indie films.
What? No, nobody's ever struggled with audio on an indie film.
Well, that's a good point. Yeah. You just hit record and whatever, it'll sound fine.
Yeah, the camera has a microphone on it.
Yeah, good point. So we don't even need to do this episode. It's all good.
It's a freebie.
No, let's talk about sound.
Well, I feel like you're going to be a great resource for this one as a very talented audio engineer.
Well, thank you.
It's very true. So what is involved in film sound?
So for me, what I've learned over the last 10 years, because I was basically thrown into heavy-duty audio editing on our first feature film.
Okay.
Backstory, Brown Truck, which you can get on Lower Gentry Studios newsletter.
Shameless plug for the Lower Gentry Studios newsletter.
Yeah, good luck making it through all the way through that film, by the way. It's a rough one. It's a very rough one. But our friend, really awesome dude, volunteered to do location sound on that film. He had great equipment. He had a good ear for all that stuff.
Which is awesome because you were too busy starring in the film.
Yes. I never should have acted. Once we got done with filming it, we synced up the audio to the video, edited the video, edited the movie, and then it was time to do the audio editing. And I had no clue what to do, but that was just my job. So we took the Premiere Pro file and then kicked it out into Adobe Audition, which I happen to be a little bit familiar with because I said that last week, Adobe's Audition is the same as Cool Edit Pro, which was like a 1990s, Windows 95 audio editing software.
Yeah.
And man, was that a rough learning curve.
Yeah.
We had scenes that we filmed just with MOS, I guess it's called.
Oh, it's called MOS, where you just don't bother with the sound.
Mm-hmm. Yeah? But it was dialogue. There was dialogue in there. We're like, that's fine. We'll just ADR it later.
Oh, yeah. That's the equivalent of whenever somebody's saying, oh, yeah, just fix it in post, right? And knowing.
We just planned on fixing it all in post. And it would have been really easy to get audio on some of those because one of them was in a bar. And there was no need. It was in the afternoon is when we shot it. We could have had somebody there running sound, but it was like, no, we'll just ADR it. Don't ADR things. Always record. And if it's in your capability, do your best to get live sound and use that live sound because when you're trying to recreate from silence, there are so many things that can trip you up and make the film be unnatural.
So what are some of those things?
So first of all, syncing up ADR. Most actors have a hard time with that.
Yeah.
I'm sure, famous film actors that have to do it quite a bit or have done it quite a bit, they might be better than, just your average regional actor that gets some commercial gigs and things like that.
Yeah.
But I think out of all the people that we had, I will say Chance Furstinger, he was awesome.
Yeah.
We had to have him ADR a whole bunch of stuff because even though we learned that lesson, quote unquote, not to film silently, we ended up having to do a whole bunch of ADR in our Canyon County web series. But we're like, by this time, we'll have figured out a method. You don't. It just sounds unnatural. So getting actors to listen back to what they said and then say it exactly the same is really tricky.
It is. Though, if I can throw in a tip here, and I'm not about to say that I'm good at ADR as an actor. I'm not going to say that. I will say I have gotten better.
Okay.
Because I have started doing more just voice work. So me attempting to do ADR years and years and years ago versus after being a spokesperson for a software company where I was filming all the voiceover stuff and filming all the tutorial video stuff. because you get no visual cues whatsoever, your voice has to do a lot, and it's almost like voice actor training.
Okay.
But basically, take some voice acting classes, read out loud and record yourself reading out loud, narrate an audiobook, do whatever you possibly can to learn how your voice sounds and how much more effort it takes for it to sound real when you don't get the same visual cues anymore. And that, I think, can help you overall for ADR stuff and can help you read your own emotions and know what level you need to get back to when you're in the ADR booth and you actually need to be out of breath because you just finished running a mile and now you're seeing a dead body and you're trying to scream or whatever it is.
Yeah.
It's a very weird example. I don't know when that would come up, but just in case.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, that makes perfect sense. Our stuff is, Lower Gentry stuff is mostly realistic fiction. Our first film was a sci-fi, but it was super low, but it's all been super low budget. But we didn't have those types of scenes where it was that drastic. And so even just the basic, like, Matt Melton did a great job on his ADR lines too.
Oh, that's fair.
In Brown Truck, in our very first feature film.
Wait, is Matt Melton in Brown Truck?
Yeah, he was the bartender. He was the one. He was the bartender.
He was the bartender.
Yes, he was in that one.
Oh,
he was
my
kind enough to donate his time to us, like way back in the day while we were.
Matt's just a generous guy.
Yeah,
though. He's
and since then he's been in a lot of our productions.
Yeah,
he's awesome to work with. But the ADR thing, it is hard, even if you're just doing basic lines and you're not screaming in agony or like trying acting hard, as one way I like to put it. It just delivering your lines, it's not easy for actors or anyone for that matter to repeat things with the same inflection, like you were saying. And so once that's established with ADR and you have these lines and it's like, well, we just got to get what we're going to get because it's an indie film and we can't rehash this over and 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 over. I'll keep going over and over again. You got to move on. And then after that, there's the ambience in the room, like the room tone all needs to be recreated.
Oh, yeah.
And then the trickiest part is the foley. The foley stuff was a nightmare. I put so many footsteps. So Brown Truck has this scene that we shot silently where a drunken woman is crossing the street.
Okay.
And she's walking in heels, and then her heel comes off, and then she's walking heel barefoot.
Oh.
So yeah, and it was like, I don't know, like a minute or two long, and I had to go frame by frame and insert heel footsteps on every single time that her foot hit the ground as she's moving, and then I had to alternate between a heel step and a barefoot step. And the amount of effort that you have to put into that to get the sound there, and there was not even any dialogue. So that type of stuff, when it's live sound, you can usually get away with, an XY, like a stereo microphone.
Just point it at.
And then get a good boom, even if it's at a little bit of a distance. Like your brain doesn't register sound effects as being off as much as the dialogue.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Because if the voice sounds weird, then you're just like, I don't know what the hell's happening. This is awful.
Especially if it's a wider shot and you hear the heel clicking on the ground about the time you see the heel clicking on the ground, then your brain will kind of put those together versus if it's even a few frames off when somebody's speaking. Yeah. It's so grating on your brain, or my brain anyway.
Oh, yeah, yeah. When it gets slightly, when the lips don't quite match. It drives me crazy. But
it's obnoxious.
So sound editing, I kind of have a list here. First thing I always do is dialogue cleanup.
Okay.
You want to make sure that the dialogue is audible, and you want to make sure that the background noise isn't too loud.
Okay.
And hopefully you have good location sound so that it's not an issue. If you do have bad location sound, what ends up happening is you have to run the dialogue through all sorts of tools that, like plugins that clean it up.
Yeah.
And the way that they work basically is, let's say that you are recording something, for example, and you have your room and it's relatively quiet, but you're doing a close up on an actor and you have the cinematographer close to them. Maybe they decide to use like a 25 instead of a 50.
Yeah.
So the camera's up closer and you're getting dialogue and that fan is going. And that happens a lot when you're filming. It's just something that happens. So the
fan from the camera.
The camera's going,
Yeah.
sorry. The camera fan's just buzzing, right?
Yeah.
And so what you have to do is you have to take a section of that camera buzz, which is why it's good to always get a little bit of room tone on the front and the end of the shot if you can. You just want to have, with that mic placement, that hum. And when you take it into the audio software, what that does is if you use the, I think it's called spectral cleanup, you just take a sample of that. And then what it does is it runs that sound 180 degrees out of phase over the top of the dialogue.
Oh, so that kind of neutralizes that sound.
Yes.
Or that specific frequency and noise.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So the way a speaker works is it pushes and it pulls. And so if you look at a sound file on your sound editor, that information is literally just telling the speaker when to vibrate.
Oh, is that why it's called a wave?
Yes, that's why it's called a wave file. It's like a wave. It's just riding the waves up and down. And so if you take a file and you flip it 180 degrees out of phase and play it against itself, you end up getting silence because the up peak is countered by the bottom
now
peak.
Being told to pull at the same pace and intensity and
so you just
timing.
get a flat a flat line and it doesn't make any sound. So what happens when you have very loud ambient sound is if it's covering a lot of frequencies and you have to turn it up to cancel that out, it's destroying the person's voice.
Oh.
So if you're trying to fix sound in a bad environment, that's a lot of ambient noise, a lot of fans going like that,
refrigerators buzzing, HVAC systems. Okay.
a lot of traffic. You can get, the car sound as it's going by. You can get a sample of that if they're not talking during that part, and you can cancel it out. But then all of a sudden, their voice gets really tinny.
Yeah.
And I don't know if
Sounds
you've
like
heard
they're in like this long aluminum hallway screaming at you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It sounds very distant.
It's what happens when you
very
just
tinny.
use the capture noise print in Adobe Audition, and then you layer it over the whole thing and just say remove this, and then suddenly everyone sounds like they're either underwater or screaming from a tin can. Yeah.
Yes. So you got to be careful with that. Hopefully you can get good location sound, but if you do mess around with those tools, there's a way to not turn it down all the way.
Okay.
And then the other thing I wanted to talk about is ambience as well. And that was one of the tricks that I learned when we were doing Canyon County, because we had silent scenes in Canyon County, the web series, and those are on YouTube. And then I got better at it in the Chit Chat web series. Those are on YouTube as well, under Lower Gentry Studios. The more ambience you have, the more you can get away with. More ambience you add in post, the more you can get away with noisy audio in the film. So let's say you're filming outside. Mm-hmm. You can have get a recording of that outdoor area, right?
Okay,
With
like a park.
A stereo recording, because you want to have both left and right channels.
Fair.
And that'll help not fight with the dialogue, which is a quote unquote center channel.
Okay.
So it'll give it space in the mix. But if you add that, and then if you go get a sound library, BBC actually has a pretty awesome sound library that's free.
Oh, nice.
You can't use it commercially.
No.
So if you're an indie filmmaker and you just are throwing things up wherever and you don't care about it, you can use the BBC sound library.
But if you're also a student filmmaker, you'd be able to use that.
Yeah, good point. I usually try to add like a stock room tone for ambience.
Okay.
I use my own room tone.
Wait, for indoor or outdoor?
Indoor and outdoor. I just put a bass line.
Okay.
A nice warm hum.
Okay, kind of like a brown noise or a pink noise or a white noise or whatever color you prefer that day.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then I'll add this is a residential. I have several different residential neighborhood ambient noises that are slightly different.
Dogs barking, kids on bikes.
Yes, exactly. All that stuff. And so I'll try to add 3 to 4 layers of ambience.
Oh.
And if I have audio that requires a lot of cleanup, that I'm destroying too much, if I'm trying to phase out that noise, I won't phase it out as much so that their voice still holds up, but then I'll take all those different ambient tracks and I'll just feather them up until it covers the noise and the hum that you get from the room, like the actual sound.
Location.
Yeah. So that's a trick that I learned that helps a lot, is just making sure that you have a few tracks of ambience.
Is that why people would end up theoretically with 20, 30, even more audio tracks in post by the time you're done with it? Okay.
Yep, that's exactly why. Because if you have a couple different people talking, you're going to need a couple tracks for just the dialogue that's going on, especially if they're laved up and they're on a different track.
Yeah.
So usually I'll have anywhere from like 4 to 6 dialogue tracks that I all send through one dialogue processor with some compression and EQ, which is super important if you're going to be learning how to edit sound. You need to learn EQ is the most important at first, and then compression, but those two go hand in hand.
Because compression, and this is my ignorance of audio editing.
Okay.
So I used to think if I want something louder, I highlight the whole thing and I just crank it up, just lift the volume up, because that makes it louder.
It does.
But compression kind of makes things louder.
Compression makes things louder and more even. So the basics of compression are, if we're talking, which I put compression on this podcast, right?
Yeah.
And if I'm talking really loud, I can back up from my microphone. But if I'm up close, I don't want to clip it because it's going to be a pain in the butt later in post. What I can do is I can say, okay, anything over this volume, whatever it is. So it goes up to 0 on audio editors.
Okay.
And usually I say, like, I'll start like -15 or -20. So anything underneath negative, or anything over -15, -20 dB, if it goes up 1 dB, I actually want it to only go up like a quarter. So it's a ratio.
Oh, okay.
So normally, like, you might do something if you want light compression, like 2 to 1 or 4 to 1. So when that signal goes up 4 dB, the software is only going to let it go up 1.
Okay.
So as it gets louder, it turns the volume down only on that part, so you can take the entire track and turn it all up.
But equally level it.
So the quieter things will sound louder, and the louder things will sound quieter.
Okay, so it's getting you to a nice normalized, this is pretty clean, crisp audio you can always hear.
Yes.
And then you can manipulate it in post.
And the variability is going to be a lot less. So when you have actors that are delivering lines and then they're really loud on one and then they're whispering on the next one, you don't have to go through as much and cut each piece and then turn them up and turn them down and turn them up and turn them down.
Crossfade them into each other and hope that it feels smooth enough, because
I've totally never done that. If you're turning things up a lot on one, if somebody whispers really low and then the next line is really loud, you would want to use more compression on that, because otherwise you're going to hear it. It's going to sound weird. It's going to sound like somebody riding the fader on a mixing board.
I feel like you're describing most of my like high school and college films.
Yeah. If you are in an area where you don't know a lot of sound people, or find a musician, or if you know a musician that records their own and mixes their own stuff, they would be able to go in pretty competently, I would imagine, to start off. That's how I started off with doing film sound, was I knew how to do music stuff. It's just that the dynamic range is a lot wider on film than on music, because music, you want to just kind of crank everything up as loud as possible.
Yeah.
And you can get away with a lot more noise, like the amp hum and things like that.
Yeah.
Film sound, you need to try to get it clean on the location. So anyway, the ambience is super important. And then the Foley and the sound effects is the next thing. Just make sure that anything you can see on camera, if there's no sound there, just add it. Whether it's, I was working on something the other day where they didn't get location sound for a guy that was like fixing his canopy on the outside of his house. And I was like, oh man, that's such a weird thing. And it was unfortunate because I'm like, I don't know what to do. I don't have I was looking for, in my sound effects library, like a man setting up a tent or somebody setting up a tent.
Like a tarp or a tent?
No, what I ended up doing, because it had like little metal poles, is I used a hamster wheel squeaking and then a flag, or some type of flag
waving,
lightly blowing in the breeze. And then I had another, like a metal clanking, like somebody like wrenching something. And so I put all 3 of those effects underneath him very quietly. So you hear like a flag blown in the wind, and then that on top of the metal sounds on top of that. And it seemed to work okay.
Yeah, but now I'm just thinking about a cute little hamster running around and helping somebody set up their canopy.
It works for that too. You could just put stock photos or a stock video of a hamster, and it would sound.
I would.
Yeah.
I would. Okay. So then really fast rundown. the order of those things one more time. If you're going to do audio post, what's your recommended order of handling it?
The way I do things is I fix the dialogue, make sure it's as clean as possible without it sounding too tinny. Then I add ambience, including like a warm room tone that I like that I got years ago. And then if it's a residential house, I'll put like residential area ambience in there and maybe some cars driving by too, like off in the distance, and feather that stuff in very softly. And after that's done, then I go through and manually add sound effects where they're needed. Foley and sound effects. And then finally at the end, once that all sounds good, then I'll mix in the score.
Okay. So then one more question. Sorry to make you keep repeating everything. You say Foley and sound effects. What do you kind of classify as the difference between those two things?
I guess I think of them as the same thing. Foley technically is when you make the sound effect yourself.
Okay.
So a Foley artist is somebody that has, a whole bunch of tools, like different types of shoes and different types of wood and different types of gadgets to make sounds.
Materials and different flexible or malleable plastics and aluminums and metals and whatnot.
So when they're doing footsteps, if you're a Foley artist, from what I've seen online, there are a couple good ones that you can look up and you can follow on Instagram, and I don't have them written down. Sorry about that. But they'll get the footsteps that aren't on the film, and they'll watch the movie, and they'll put shoes on that are kind of similar to that, and then they'll walk on whatever surface in place and record that. And so they'll be in charge of basically creating those sounds.
Okay.
Whereas like a sound effect library, I have a whole bunch of footsteps from one that I bought like years ago.
Okay.
So I just type in, and I have thousands and thousands and thousands of them, like male footsteps on wood with sneakers.
Okay.
Female high heels on carpet. Like there's so many.
Dang.
Walking, running, jumping.
Jeez.
Yeah. It's a lot, but like all that stuff comes in handy because you get that eerie feeling when you're watching something and there's supposed to be a sound there and it's not.
It's not there.
It pulls you out real quick.
Yeah.
So it's better to add more of that stuff in than not have it. So.
And like you said, you can sort of repurpose things. Like you wouldn't necessarily think you need a hamster running on a wheel unless you're going to film, I don't know, a hamster commercial.
Yeah.
I don't know. But then lo and behold, no, you really do need a kind of metal tinging sound, and that hamster wheel came in handy.
Yes. And we were, our first feature film, we actually inserted a staple sound, a stapler, on almost every single scene where we could. And it was just something that I did as like a joke.
Because you want to have staples?
Yeah, like the Wilhelm scream. You can look up the Wilhelm scream.
Everyone does know the Wilhelm scream.
Yeah, so we kind of did our own version of that in our first feature film, Brown Truck, where like anytime like somebody went to like grab a door handle, instead of like to make that clicky sound, I used a stapler. Or like when they set something down on the table, then I'd insert the staple sound because it's just like a click. So you can kind of use it to substitute in a lot of different things.
Yeah.
Like when the person was moving around a mouse on the computer and they clicked, I just used the stapler. I'm like, I'm going to use the stapler as many times as you can. And it doesn't pull you away until you know what it is.
Then now if I go watch it again, I'll know.
There's going to be a lot of things that pull you away from the reality if you watch the film Brown Truck. But how have you messed up sound editing?
Oh boy, quite a bit.
Yeah.
I will say some of my personal favorites. I did a horror film called Kronos, and I think I may have mentioned this, where I did not pay attention to how the zoom worked, and I don't think, I'm assuming, or it was a faulty device, I guess, because I don't know, but there's no way that's the sound that came through the microphones. I just don't think I set it to the lav mics, and so I think the input was pulling off that XY.
So you had your Zoom recorder and you had a lav mic plugged into the mic jack.
Yes.
But it was actually recording off of the mics that were connected to the recorder.
I'm pretty sure it was not actually recording the lav mics, because all I could hear was the things that were right in front of it on the floor. So the bartender, her footsteps, the humming of the fridges, that sort of thing. And then I would also venture one of my personal favorites was a entire musical with terrible sound. It's just terrible sound. I did a musical movie called Playbill.
Okay.
And
I've seen that one.
yeah,
That was a little rough.
it's horrendously offensive too, but it was fun, I guess. But yeah, and to be fair, the songs sound great because they were recorded in a studio.
Yeah, and when you're
there's
using
no room tone or ambience or Foley or anything mixed back in. So it just sounds like a bunch of silence of people singing in a recording studio.
Oh my gosh.
And then all the other audio for the entire film is just it's just terrible. Like you can barely hear some people because we couldn't get the location sound person close enough to actually record it for the scenes where we had someone available to be our location sound person. And it was rough. And we were filming in this really echoey space, which is a gorgeous space. And they were so kind to let us use it. But man, we were not up to that skill level to be able to record in a very echoey space.
Yeah, that type of stuff is difficult. I've messed up so many location sound situations where, didn't get the mic placement close enough when we are in one of those echoey locations because you just want to close the distance.
That's all you can do.
As much as possible because it's going to echo.
Yeah.
Or you can get a wide shot if you can plan it. If you're directing and your location sound person is like, it's really echoing here, mentally you can establish some of that stuff in a wide.
And then people expect the echo.
Yeah, you'll see that in a lot of movies too, where sometimes there are TV shows, especially they'll be like, oh, we're going to have an insert shot of a construction crew at the beginning of this scene in their area. And then the rest of the scene is like, you can just hear loud construction crew. And in my mind, I'm thinking, well, they probably had to shoot on location and there was street construction going on.
And there's no way around that.
They had no control over it. So all they did was they established the audience expectation by having a shot of all that noise at the beginning and then make it real loud. And then when they go to the dialogue scene, it's not going to be as loud, but you don't notice it as much.
And you know why it's there. If your brain as a viewer can explain why the sound is there, then it's not going to pull you out of it. It's not going to make it seem weird or distracting.
Yeah.
You're just going to be able to put those puzzle pieces together as a viewer, which is nice.
That helps. So, it helps a lot. Do you have a good and a bad example of audio and film that you want to share?
I would say, I wrote, I think pretty much every modern action flick would be bad sound mixing.
Oh, okay.
I'm gonna. Yeah, it's just it doesn't work. It's so loud and it's so chaotic during all the explosions and all the fight scenes. And I'm looking at you, Michael Bay, and like it's so loud and it's so much. And then you go to the dialogue and I'm like, I don't know if my ears have just been blown out and I can't hear anything, or is this just really, really quiet for some inexplicable reason? I don't know. I don't know if it's poor mixing or I've just gone deaf because it's so loud during those other scenes.
They do in movies tend to mix the dialogue lower. I will say if you have a surround sound system though, which a lot of those films are mixed for surround sound, if you have a middle center channel speaker, you can crank the volume up on that.
Yeah.
And that's what I have to do on my surround sound system is I have just the center channel turned up way louder than the rest of the channels, and it balances out that way, which you shouldn't really have to do.
You shouldn't have to do, especially since I'm going to throw this one out there, and I'm going to throw this out as an ask, which is never fair to do when someone's just consuming audio content or video content, depending on how you're consuming this podcast. I have a legitimate question, though. I want to know, as a poll, if you will, how many people actually have any sort of speaker system hooked up to their home television? Or do you just use the speakers that come with the TV because all you have to do is just plug in the TV and then you have sound?
Yeah, people that listen on their TV sound, I have a real problem with that.
Yeah, Chuck and I do not agree on this one because I'm like, no, I can hear it. I have speakers. The TV has speakers. Why would I need speakers? Chuck, however, has a very nice sound system situation set up around his TV.
It's important. And people who, if I'm at a party and somebody takes their phone out to play music and sets it on the counter or on the table and they're listening on their phone, that drives me up a damn wall. I'm sorry. It sounds like complete garbage. And those little tiny phone speakers, their strongest frequency are right at speech frequency, I feel like. And so you're not getting any low basses or high highs. You're just getting like the mid and the highs.
I feel like you're really...
It's awful.
But that's so judgmental. How many people are listening to this podcast on their phone right now?
I don't know. Let me know if you're listening on your phone. I listen in my car to most podcasts. I sync it up to
I do like the Bluetooth
system.
features. And I do have headphones that I'll throw in for not these. I could use these, I guess, but
yeah. Headphones are a great way. If you're watching videos on your iPhone or on your computer or whatever, sync up a decent pair of Bluetooth headphones to them, and
I'm never
so
going to do that. I'm never going to put in that kind of effort to watch something on my laptop. I'm not going to put in that kind of effort.
Well, that's what my recommendation is. So
I feel the shade. Thank you.
I have a good and bad recommendation too for sound, and we should probably get wrapping up here.
Fair.
Metalhead, Black Mirror. The post sound on that is incredible. If you haven't seen the Black Mirror series, it's really...
Which one is Metalhead?
Metalhead is the one about the little robots that come to life and attack people. It's black and white.
Oh, I don't know if I've seen that one. That sounds delightful.
Yeah, but it's really well done because the way they got the robots to move and the way it's all mixed, they kind of shot it high contrast, black and white.
Yeah.
And then everything was mixed a little bit higher in the EQ band, so it's like tinnier.
Okay, intentionally tinnier.
Intentionally tinnier, and it's post-apocalyptic, and they have these robots that kind of escaped and killed everybody, if I remember correctly. Anyway, the sound design is freaking amazing in that one.
Okay.
And a lot of special effects, so there was no location sound
No.
for any of this stuff, and they did a great job.
Nice.
Yeah, Silicon Valley, again, I mentioned that, I think, last month, was not very good.
Oh, yeah.
It was not very good ADR. I mean, the show itself has some really cool sound design elements and jokes that rely on the sound design, but they did not do well making their ADR sound like it came from the environment. So if you're working in Adobe Audition, the best way that I found to mix in an ADR line with a location sound line, let's say you didn't get something that you need or you want to add a line in later to the film, is to use convoluted reverb.
Okay, is that like a setting? Or
it's a plugin.
Okay.
They have a reverb plugin, a couple different ones. If you use the convoluted reverb, you can actually use a sample if you're thinking ahead, and you clap your hands in the room and use your get it. How do I explain this? It's easier to just show it on the software. So if you're getting it, like you get room tone, you can actually get like a clapping sound. So like if you get the sound of the slate clicking with the microphone, there's a reverb profile there.
Okay.
And Adobe can mimic that with convoluted reverb.
Oh, so they can take that same like...
reverb profile, like the click sound and however the echo sound after that.
And then they could put that on your ADR... audio to make it sound more like, because your goal here is to make your ADR sound more like it happened in the film, not trying to make, or on location, not trying to make your location sound like your ADR sound.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. You want to go the other way.
Okay.
So convoluted reverb. There you go.
Those are some awesome tips, Chuck.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Got anything else, or should we succinctly say goodbye?
I think all I have left in me is a goodbye.
Adios.